The council chamber floated in space, a massive ring of metal and glass orbiting the diplomatic world below. Inside, 12 species sat in their designated seats, their forms as different as the stars themselves. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few existed as clouds of luminous gas contained in specialized suits. They had gathered here today for one purpose: to decide what to do about the humans. Ambassador Minji Choi stood in the center of the chamber, her hands clasped behind her back. She wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, and her face showed no emotion. She had known this day might come. For 300 years, humanity had worked alongside these ancient species, building stations, healing the sick, and keeping the peace. But humans were different. They felt too much. They cared too much. And today, that difference had become a problem. The head counselor, a tall being with 6 eyes and skin like polished stone, spoke in a voice that echoed through the chamber. Ambassador Choi, humanity stands accused of violating the non-interference doctrine. 6 months ago, a plague struck the Vrin colony on Theta 7. The council ordered a complete quarantine. No ships in, no ships out. The infection had to be contained. Minji nodded slowly. She remembered that day very clearly. But humanity defied this order, the counselor continued. Your medical ships entered the quarantine zone. Your doctors treated the infected. Your engineers built emergency hospitals. You saved 847,000 Vrin lives. He paused, and in doing so you risked spreading the plague across 6 sectors. The plague did not spread, Minji said quietly. That is not the point. Another counselor rose, her crystalline form flashing with anger. Rules exist for a reason. Order must be maintained. The galactic community cannot function if members simply ignore our decisions whenever they feel emotional about a situation. Minji wanted to argue. She wanted to tell them that 800,000 lives mattered more than their rules. She wanted to remind them that the plague had been contained precisely because human doctors understood both the disease and the fear. But she had learned long ago that these beings did not think the way humans did. They saw the universe in terms of order and chaos, rules and violations. Compassion was not a factor in their equations. Captain Jiwon Park watched from the observation gallery above. He commanded the human vessel Silent Exodus, a diplomatic ship that had been waiting outside the station for 3 days. He had a bad feeling about this meeting. The other human observers sitting near him wore similar expressions of worry. They all knew what was coming. The vote began. One by one, the counselors indicated their decision. Blue light meant humans could stay. Red light meant banishment. The first light glowed red. Then another. And another. Jiwon counted them as they appeared. 3 blue lights flickered hopefully in the darkness, but 9 red lights blazed like angry stars. The head counselor stood once more. The decision is made. Humanity is hereby expelled from the galactic community. You have 6 standard months to remove all personnel, close all outposts, and withdraw from all joint ventures. After that time, human vessels will not be permitted in community space. The chamber fell silent. Everyone waited for the human response. Would they argue? Would they threaten? Would they refuse to leave? Humans were known for their emotions, after all. Surely they would react with anger or desperation. Ambassador Minji Choi simply bowed her head slightly. We understand, she said. We will comply. The counselors seemed surprised by this. They had expected drama. Instead, they got quiet acceptance. Minji turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. The other human observers rose and followed her. No one said a word. Captain Park met Minji at the docking bay. Ambassador, he said softly. What are your orders? Minji looked out at the stars through the transparent walls. Somewhere out there, human doctors were saving lives. Human engineers were keeping stations running. Human teachers were helping young aliens learn. Human merchants were moving goods across impossible distances. All of that would have to stop. Contact every human outpost, she said. Every ship, every station, every individual. Tell them we have 6 months to leave. No protests, no delays. We will depart with dignity. And after we're gone? Park asked. Minji smiled sadly. After we're gone, they will learn what we were worth. Over the next few days, the message spread across the galaxy. Humans began to pack. In the medical facilities, Dr. Haijin Lee supervised the transfer of 17 hospitals to alien staff. She spent long hours training the doctors who would replace her team, showing them how the equipment worked. explaining the supply chains, teaching them the protocols that kept everything running smoothly. This machine monitors 40 different life signs, she explained to a tall avian doctor. You must check the filters every week. The suppliers are listed here. The maintenance schedule is programmed in, but you should also know how to do manual repairs. She paused. Do you understand all of this? The avian doctor nodded, though his eyes showed uncertainty. Yes, I believe so. Yejin handed him a data pad containing hundreds of pages of documentation. Everything is in here. If you have questions after we leave, you can reference this. She did not say what she was thinking, that reading instructions was not the same as having experience. Commander Daeho Kim oversaw the shutdown of engineering operations at Galactic Hub 7. The massive station served as a junction point for 12 trade routes. Human engineers had designed half of its systems and maintained most of the rest. Daeho watched as his team carefully documented everything, creating guides and manuals for the alien engineers who would take over. Sir, one of his engineers said, the power coupling on level 40 is unstable. It needs a complete rebuild, but that will take 3 weeks. Daeho checked the calendar. They had 5 weeks left. Do a temporary fix. Reinforce it as best you can. Leave detailed instructions for a full repair. The engineer looked worried. A temporary fix might last 6 months. Maybe a year if they're lucky. Then we hope they're lucky, Daeho said. We can only do what we can do. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. Humans finished their work, trained their replacements, and prepared to leave. Some aliens seemed happy to see them go. Others expressed confusion. A few even thanked them. On Theta 7, the Vryn colony that humans had saved from plague, an elder stood watching as the last human medical ship prepared to depart. Tears ran down his scaled face. Around him, thousands of Vryn who owed their lives to human doctors stood in silence. They saved us, the elder whispered. And this is how we repay them. Exactly 6 months after the Council's vote, the last human vessel crossed the boundary out of galactic community space. Captain Park sat on the bridge of the silent exodus, looking back at the galaxy they were leaving behind. All human vessels are accounted for, his officer reported. We're going home. Park nodded. Behind them, stations went dark. Workshops fell silent. Hospital beds sat empty. The humans were gone. And in the quiet they left behind, something began to break. Engineer Sunho An stood in the central control room of Hypergate Junction, staring at the systems he had spent 15 years building and maintaining. The junction was one of the most important stations in the galaxy, a massive structure where 3 major trade routes met. Ships from hundreds of worlds passed through here every day. Without the junction, those routes would take months longer to travel. With it, the journey took hours. Sunho had designed 60% of the systems in this room. The other 40% he had rebuilt to work better. He knew every wire, every circuit, every backup system. He could diagnose problems by sound alone. Once he had fixed a critical failure while half asleep, his hands working from muscle memory. Now he had to leave it all behind. The replacement team is here, his assistant said, gesturing to the group of alien engineers waiting nervously by the door. There were 5 of them, representing 3 different species. They all held data pads and looked very serious. Sunho smiled at them, though he felt sadness in his chest. Welcome. Let me show you how everything works. For the next 2 weeks, Sunho barely slept. He walked the replacement team through every system, every procedure, every trick he had learned over 15 years. He created detailed manuals. He recorded video guides. He programmed diagnostic tools that would help them identify problems. But he knew it was not enough. Operating complex systems required more than knowledge. It required intuition, experience, and the ability to see how everything connected together. These engineers were smart and capable, but they had not lived and breathed these systems the way Sunho had. On his last day, the head of the replacement team, a being named Vex with 4 arms and green scales, shook Sunho's hand. Thank you for all your help. We will take good care of the junction. Sunho nodded. The power couplings on levels 40 through 43 are temperamental. Check them daily. The instructions are in Section 7 of the manual. We will, Vex promised, and the backup generators need to cycle every 72 hours, or they build up residual charge. That is in Section 12. Yes, we have read it. Sunho wanted to say more. He wanted to tell Vex about the 100 small things that were not in any manual, the little adjustments and observations that kept everything running perfectly. but he could see that Vex was already overwhelmed. So Sunho just smiled. "Good luck," he said, and walked away. On the medical station orbiting Talos Prime, Dr. Yuna Han packed up her research. She had spent 8 years studying the Lumina, a rare species of beings who communicated through patterns of light. The work was delicate and important. The Lumina were dying out, and Yuna believed she was close to understanding why. Her replacement, Dr. Gorth, stood watching her pack. He was a tall being with feathers and intelligent eyes. "Will you take your research with you?" he asked. Yuna shook her head. "No, it belongs here. I'm giving you all my data, all my notes, all my samples. Everything I learned is yours." She handed him a storage device containing 8 years of work. Gorth held it carefully as if it were made of glass. "This is very generous." "The Lumina need help," Yuna said simply. "It does not matter who helps them as long as someone does." But as she walked away, Yuna felt a deep worry. Her research was only part of the picture. The real knowledge was in her head, in the connections she had made, in the intuitive leaps that came from years of observation. That could not be handed over on a storage device. On Harmony Point, a station where dozens of species lived and worked together, Corporal Taejin Ryu completed his final security check. He had been assigned here for 6 years, keeping the peace in a place where cultural misunderstandings could easily spark conflicts. Taejin had learned to read body language across 20 different species. He knew when the Karathi were about to lose their tempers. He understood the subtle signs of discomfort in the Brellan. He could sense tension before it erupted into violence. It was not something he had been taught. It was something he had learned through experience and careful attention. His replacement was a young Karathi officer named Threx. Threx was enthusiastic and well-trained, but he did not have Taejin's instincts. "Remember," Taejin said, "the Brellan do not like direct eye contact. It makes them feel threatened. And the Karathi need space when they are angry. Do not crowd them." Threx nodded, taking notes on his datapad. "I understand." Taejin hoped that was true. As he walked to his ship for the last time, residents of Harmony Point came out to say goodbye. Some thanked him. Some gave him small gifts. A few cried. Taejin tried to smile, but his heart was heavy. Captain Suman Kwan sat in the cargo hold of her small trading vessel, looking at the empty spaces where goods used to be. She had run a successful business for 20 years, moving cargo between the outer rim territories and the core worlds. Her routes were efficient, her prices were fair, and her reputation was excellent. But now those routes would not exist. Human trading vessels moved 40% of all cargo in the galaxy. They connected markets, delivered supplies, and kept commerce flowing. When they left, those connections would break. Salmon sent messages to all her regular clients apologizing for the canceled contracts. Most understood. Some were angry. A few begged her to stay. But the law was clear. Humans had to leave. As her ship passed through the outer markers of community space for the last time, Soman looked back at the stars. Somewhere out there, merchants were scrambling to find new suppliers. Supply chains were breaking. Prices were rising. But that was no longer her problem. All across the galaxy, humans departed. Scientists abandoned their research. Teachers left their students. Builders left their projects unfinished. Every human did their best to transfer knowledge and train replacements, but some things could not be transferred. Some knowledge existed only in the doing. On the Vryn colony of Theta 7, Elder Mirren walked through the hospital that humans had built during the plague. The equipment was still there. The medicine was still there. But the human doctors who had known how to use it all together were gone. A young Vryn doctor approached him. "Elder, we are struggling. The humans left us manuals and instructions. But there is so much we do not understand. How did they make it all look so easy?" Myron put a gentle hand on the young doctor's shoulder. "They made it look easy because they had done it for so long. Experience cannot be taught in a few weeks. What will we do?" Myron looked around at the hospital, at the equipment, at the systems that humans had left behind. "We will learn. We will make mistakes, and we will wish we had not driven them away." In Earth's orbit, the human fleet gathered. Hundreds of vessels, from massive colony ships to small personal craft, assembled for the journey home. They had come from every corner of the galaxy, and now they were returning together. Ambassador Minji Choi stood on the bridge of the silent exodus, watching the fleet organize itself. Captain Jiwon Park stood beside her. "All vessels are accounted for," Park reported. "We are ready to proceed to Earth." Minji nodded. Take us home, Captain. As the fleet began to move, Minji thought about what they were leaving behind. All those years of work, all those friendships, all those lives saved and problems solved. It seemed like such a waste. Do you think they will miss us? Park asked quietly. Minji looked at him. Eventually. But by then, it might be too late. The human fleet jumped to faster than light speed and the stars blurred around them. Behind them, the galaxy grew quiet. Workstations sat empty. Maintenance schedules were missed. Small problems, the kind that humans would have fixed before anyone noticed, began to pile up. On Hypergate Junction, Engineer Vex sat in the control room that used to belong to Sunho. Everything seemed fine. The systems were running normally. The trade routes were clear. But Vex felt a strange unease, as if he was forgetting something important. He pulled up the manual Sunho had created and started reading Section 7, the part about the power couplings. It all made sense on the screen. But Vex had never actually repaired a power coupling before. He had only read about it. Vex pushed the worry away. Everything was fine. The systems were working. He would learn as he went, just like the humans had. He did not notice the small warning light that had begun to blink on Console 42. It was a minor alert, the kind that Sunho would have investigated immediately. But Vex did not see it. He was too busy reading the manual, trying to understand what 15 years of experience had made instinctive for Sunho. The warning light continued to blink, ignored and alone in the darkness. 3 months had passed since the last human vessel crossed the boundary out of galactic community space. On Hypergate Junction, Engineer Vex was having the worst day of his career. The warning light he had not noticed 3 months ago had grown into a serious problem. Now the entire level 40 power coupling system was failing, and he did not know how to fix it. How long until the backup systems fail? Vex asked his team, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. 6 hours, replied one of his engineers, a young Karathi named Ren. Maybe 7 if we are lucky. And how long will repairs take? Ren looked at his data pad, then at the complex maze of machinery before them. According to the human manual, a full repair should take 48 hours. But none of us have done this before. It could take longer. Vex felt a cold sensation in his stomach. The junction handled 3 major trade routes. If the power failed, hundreds of ships would be stranded in space, unable to use the gates. The delays would cost millions of credits and strand thousands of travelers. He pulled up the section of Sunho's manual that dealt with power coupling repairs. The instructions were clear and detailed. But reading about repairs was very different from actually doing them. Sunho had performed this procedure dozens of times. His hands had known what to do without thinking. Vex and his team were starting from nothing. Begin the repairs, Vex ordered. Work as fast as you can. As his team scrambled to follow the manual's instructions, Vex sent out a message to all incoming ships, warning them of possible delays. Within minutes, angry responses flooded back. Merchants who had deadlines to meet, passengers who had appointments to keep. Everyone demanding to know why the junction, which had run perfectly for 20 years, was suddenly having problems. Vex did not tell them the truth, that the junction had only run perfectly because Sunho had made it look easy. The repairs took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of ships backed up at the gates, 3 weeks of angry messages and mounting costs. When the system finally came back online, it worked, but not as smoothly as before. Small glitches appeared. Efficiency dropped by 15%. And Vex knew there were other systems throughout the station that would eventually fail the same way. At the medical station orbiting Talos Prime, Dr. Gorath faced his own crisis. The equipment was breaking down, and he did not know why. The diagnostic machines worked, but the results made no sense. The supply shipments arrived late, or not at all. The coordination between different departments, which had seemed so effortless under human management, was falling apart. Doctor, his assistant said, we are running out of Serenix medication. The shipment was supposed to arrive yesterday. Gorath checked his console, confused. I ordered it 3 weeks ago. Where is it? The supplier says they shipped it to the wrong station. They are trying to redirect it now. When will it arrive? 5 days? Maybe 6. Gorath felt frustration rising in his chest. We have patients who need that medication now. 5 days is too long. His assistant looked helpless. I am sorry, doctor. I do not know what else to do. Gorath sat down heavily in his chair. Dr. Yuna had managed 17 medical facilities at once. She had kept track of supplies, equipment maintenance, staff schedules, and patient care across 4 sectors. Gorath could barely manage one station. How had she done it? The manuals explained the procedures, but they did not explain how to see the whole picture at once. How to anticipate problems before they became critical. He pulled up Yuna's research on the Lumina, hoping to make progress where she had left off. The data was all there, carefully organized and documented. But looking at the data, Gorath realized he did not understand Yuna's logic. She had made leaps of intuition that were not explained in her notes. She had seen patterns that were not obvious to him. The Lumina continued to die, and Gorath did not know how to save them. On Harmony Point, Officer Threx was learning that keeping peace was harder than he had thought. Without Tyjan's instincts for reading people, small misunderstandings were escalating into arguments. Arguments were turning into fights. The station's atmosphere, once peaceful and friendly, was growing tense. A Brellan merchant had accused a Karathi trader of cheating. The Karathi, insulted, had responded with aggressive posturing. Threx had tried to intervene, but he had made the situation worse by standing too close to the Karathi, crowding him. The argument had turned into a physical fight that required 6 officers to break up. Threx filed his report, feeling frustrated. Tajian had told him the Karathi needed space when angry. Threx had remembered, but in the moment he had forgotten. Knowledge in your head was different from instinct in your body. The fights kept happening. The station's residents, who had lived peacefully for years, were starting to avoid each other. The delicate balance that Tajian had maintained with subtle adjustments and careful attention was breaking down. Throughout the galaxy, similar problems multiplied. Trade routes that had functioned smoothly for decades were experiencing delays. The human merchant vessels, which had moved 40% of all cargo, were gone. Other species tried to fill the gap, but they did not have the humans' extensive network of contacts, their efficient routing systems, or their reputation for reliability. Prices rose. Shortages appeared. Markets that had been connected for generations became isolated again. The Galactic Emergency Response Network, which humans had operated with quiet efficiency, was offline. When disasters struck, response times were 8 times slower. A flood on Kelrath Prime killed 300 people because rescue ships arrived too late. An accident on a mining station left workers trapped for days. Help came eventually, but not fast enough. In the council chamber, Councillor Then reviewed reports with growing unease. He had voted to banish the humans, confident that the galaxy would adapt. Other species had managed before humans arrived. They would manage again, but the reports painted a different picture. Every system humans had touched was experiencing problems. Not because humans had sabotaged anything, but because humans had been the only ones who truly understood how all these systems worked together. It is temporary, Then told himself. We just need time to adjust. A fellow counselor, a being named Ilara, approached him. Have you seen the casualty reports from the Karathi-Brellan border dispute? Then had seen them. A minor territorial argument had escalated into open fighting. 34,000 beings were dead. Human mediators would have resolved the dispute in a few weeks, using their talent for understanding both sides and finding compromise. Without them, the conflict had exploded. The Karathi and Brellan have hated each other for centuries, Then said. This is not about the humans, really? Ilara asked. Then why did they coexist peacefully for the 200 years that humans were mediating their disputes? Then had no answer for that. On Theta 7, Elder Myron stood in the hospital's emergency room, watching doctors struggle with a case that would have been routine for the human staff. A patient was dying and they could not figure out why. The diagnostic equipment provided data, but the doctors did not know how to interpret it. The treatment protocols were in the manuals, but they did not know which protocol to use. The patient died while they were still reading the instructions. Myron felt anger and sadness mixing in his chest. The humans had saved 847,000 Vryn during the plague. They had worked without rest, without regard for their own safety, driven by nothing but the desire to help, and the council had punished them for it. Now Vryn were dying again, not from plague this time, but from lack of knowledge, lack of experience, lack of the humans who had made healthcare look so simple. Myron made a decision. He contacted other Vryn elders, leaders who felt the same anger and sadness. Together, they began to write a message to the Galactic Council. It was time to admit the truth. They had made a terrible mistake. But even as Myron wrote, he wondered if it was too late. Would the humans even respond after how they had been treated? On Earth, Ambassador Minji Choi sat in her office, watching news feeds from across the galaxy. The reports troubled her. People were dying. Systems were failing. The galaxy was breaking apart. Her assistant entered quietly. "Ambassador, we are receiving messages from the Galactic Council. They want to discuss reinstating humanity." Minji had been expecting this. What are they offering? They want us to return as contractors, to fix the problems and restore the systems. Do they mention the banishment? Do they apologize? The assistant shook his head. "No, Ambassador. They only say they need our help." Minji felt a cold anger. They had thrown humanity out for being too compassionate, too willing to break rules to save lives. Now they wanted humans to come back and fix everything. But they would not admit they had been wrong. "Delete the messages," Minji said quietly. "Earth's borders remain closed." "But Ambassador," her assistant protested, "people are dying." "I know," Minji said, and her voice was heavy with sadness. "But we cannot help people who do not value what we give. They must learn that lesson first." She looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that had rejected them. Somewhere out there, in the silence humans had left behind, that lesson was being taught. 6 months after humanity's departure, Hypergate Junction faced total collapse. The temporary repairs Vex had struggled to complete 3 months ago were failing again. This time the problem was worse. The backup systems were offline. The safety protocols were glitching, and a cascade failure was spreading through the entire station like a disease. Vex stood in the control room, watching red warning lights bloom across every console. His hands shook as he tried to input commands, following the emergency procedures from Sunho's manual. But the manual assumed certain systems would be working. Those systems were not working anymore. "How long?" he asked Ren, his voice barely a whisper. Ren checked the data, his face pale. "The main power grid will collapse in 4 hours. When that happens, everything stops. The gates, life support, everything. How many ships are in transit?" 200,000 beings are currently passing through junction space. If the gates fail while they are in the quantum tunnels, they will be trapped between dimensions. Vex felt his blood turn cold. Being trapped in a quantum tunnel meant death. A slow, horrible death as your atoms gradually lost coherence. It would take days, maybe weeks, for those people to die. "Send emergency broadcasts," Vex ordered. "Tell every ship to exit the tunnels immediately. Clear the junction." But it was too late for many. Ships were already deep in transit, too far to turn back. The best Vex could do was stop new ships from entering. He sent out the warnings and watched as the traffic patterns shifted. Ships began backing up at the entrance points, stranded, unable to use their planned routes. Vex sat down at Sunho's old console and put his head in his hands. This station had run perfectly for 20 years under human management. 6 months after they left, it was dying, and he did not know how to save it. In the medical facilities across 4 sectors, Dr. Gorith watched the supply chain fall apart completely. The coordination system that Dr. Yuna had managed was gone. 17 hospitals were running out of critical supplies at the same time. Equipment was breaking down faster than it could be repaired, and patients were dying. Gorith stood in his office looking at the mortality statistics. In the 6 months since humans left, preventable deaths had increased by 400%. 400%. People who would have lived under human care were dying because the system was broken. A message arrived from the hospital on Vryn Prime. They had lost 40 patients in 1 week due to equipment failures. The machines were old and no one knew how to maintain them properly. The human technicians had made it look easy, performing maintenance so smoothly that no one noticed it was happening. Now those technicians were gone and the machines were dying, along with the patients. Gorith tried to reach Dr. Yuna. He sent messages to Earth begging for help, asking questions about procedures he did not understand. All his messages went unanswered. Earth's borders were closed. The humans were not responding to anyone. He could not blame them, really. Why would they help the people who had thrown them out? On Harmony Point, the situation had gone from bad to critical. Officer Threx called for backup as another fight broke out between Karathi and Brellan residents. This was the 5th fight today. The station that had been peaceful for decades was turning into a war zone. The fighting had started over something small. A Brellan merchant had accidentally bumped into a Karathi customer. The Karathi had taken it as an insult. Voices were raised. Others joined in. Within minutes, 24 beings were fighting in the market square. Threx and his officers tried to break up the fight, but they did not have Tejin's gift for de-escalation. They did not know the subtle cues that would calm each species. They used force instead, which only made things worse. By the time order was restored, 6 beings were seriously injured and dozens more had minor wounds. The market square was destroyed, and the station's residents looked at each other with fear and anger instead of friendship. The station administrator sent a desperate message to the Galactic Council, asking for help. Harmony Point needed experienced peacekeepers. It needed mediators who understood multiple cultures. It needed humans. But the humans were gone. In the council chamber, Councillor Then could no longer deny reality. The reports piled up on his desk, each one worse than the last. The Hypergate Junction crisis, the medical system collapse, the border war between the Karathi and Brellan, which had now killed 60,000 beings. Trade routes failing, emergency response times increasing, preventable deaths multiplying. Every system that humans had touched was breaking, and the galaxy was paying the price. Elder Mirren of the Vryn appeared before the council, his scales dull with grief and anger. He had requested this audience and the council had granted it. Now he stood in the center of the chamber, looking at the beings who had banished humanity. Councillors, Mirren began, his voice shaking with emotion. I come before you to speak about justice. 1 year ago, the humans saved my people from extinction. 847,000 Vryn live today because humans defied your orders, because they chose compassion over compliance. Then shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Elder Myron, we understand you are grateful, but the rules. Myron's voice rose. You speak to me of rules while beings die, while systems collapse, while the galaxy tears itself apart. He gestured at the chamber around them. Look at what we have become without them. Look at what your rules have cost us. We are adapting, another counselor said. These are temporary difficulties. Myron laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Temporary? 60,000 dead in a border war that would have been prevented by human mediators. Hundreds dying in hospitals because we do not know how to maintain the systems they built. Thousands stranded in space because we cannot keep the trade routes functioning. He paused. Tell me, counselor, at what number of dead does temporary become permanent? The chamber fell silent. No one had an answer. We banished our hands, Myron said quietly. We banished our healers. We banished our builders. We punished them for saving my people, and now we are reaping what we sowed. Then stood slowly, Elder Mirren. The council recognizes that humanity's departure has created challenges. We are prepared to offer them reinstatement. We will allow them to return. Allow? Mirren stared at him. You will allow them? As if you are doing them a favor? He shook his head. They do not need your permission, counselor. We need them. There is a difference. Then what do you suggest? The council must formally apologize. We must admit we were wrong, and we must ask them to return, not as subjects who obey our rules, but as equals who deserve our respect. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably. Apologize? Admit they were wrong? Such things were not done in council chambers. The council represented order, authority, the collective wisdom of ancient species. They did not apologize, but Myron would not back down. Pride, he said, is a luxury we can no longer afford. Every day we wait, more people die. Every day we cling to our pride, the galaxy breaks a little more. He looked at each counselor in turn. The humans left quietly when we banished them. They did not threaten us. They did not punish us. They simply withdrew and let us face the consequences of our decision. That is dignity. That is strength. He paused. Can we show the same dignity now? Can we admit we were wrong? The council debated for hours after Myron left. Some counselors refused to consider an apology. Others argued that survival was more important than pride. The arguments grew heated. Old alliances fractured. New tensions appeared. Finally, Then called for a vote. All in favor of formally apologizing to humanity and requesting their return. The vote was close. 8 counselors in favor, 4 against. It passed. A message was drafted, carefully worded to acknowledge the council's error without appearing too weak. It explained the crisis facing the galaxy. It admitted that humanity's banishment had been a mistake. and it asked them to return. The message was sent to Earth. On Earth, Captain Ji-won Park received the Council's message in the middle of the night. He read it 3 times, making sure he understood correctly. They were apologizing. They were asking humans to return. They were admitting they needed help. He forwarded the message to Ambassador Choi and waited. Minji read the message at dawn, standing by the window of her apartment watching the sunrise over Earth's ocean. The message was not perfect. The apology felt calculated rather than genuine, and the request for humans to return came with an assumption that humans would naturally help because that was what humans did. They were probably right about that. Humans did help. It was in their nature, but that did not mean Minji had to make it easy for them. She called a meeting of Earth's government. Representatives from every continent gathered to discuss the galaxy's request. The debate lasted for days. Some wanted to help immediately. Others wanted to refuse out of pride. Many were simply unsure. Minji listened to all the arguments. Then she stood and spoke. "The galaxy is dying," she said. "People are suffering. That has not changed. But we have changed. We know our value now. We understand what we give and what it costs us." She paused. "If we return on our terms, not as members of the galactic community, who must obey their rules, not as servants who can be dismissed when we become inconvenient. We return as equals." 1 year after the banishment, a small human vessel approached Hypergate Junction. Engineer Gina Song sat in the pilot's seat, looking at the massive station through the viewport. She had never seen it before, but she had studied its systems for months. Her teacher had been Sunho An himself, the engineer who had built most of the junction and then been forced to leave it behind. Gina was young, only 26 years old. She had been finishing her engineering degree when the banishment happened. She had watched her teachers and mentors pack up and return to Earth, their faces heavy with sadness and frustration. She had felt that same frustration. The galaxy had thrown humanity away like trash, but now things were different. The Council had apologized. They had admitted they needed humans, and humanity had agreed to help, but not the way they had before. Gina's communication system crackled to life. "Human vessel, this is Junction Control. We have been expecting you." Gina recognized the voice. Vex, the station administrator who had tried to replace Sunho. "Junction Control, this is Engineer Song, requesting permission to dock." "Permission granted." "Bay 7, and Engineer Song, thank you for coming." There was genuine relief in Vex's voice. Gina felt a small satisfaction at that. They needed her. They needed humans. And this time everyone knew it. She brought her ship into Bay 7 and stepped out onto the station. Vex was waiting for her, along with his engineering team. They all looked exhausted, their faces showing the stress of trying to keep the station running with insufficient knowledge. Vex approached her, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting he had learned from Sunho. "Engineer Song, we are very grateful you are here. The situation is critical." Gina shook his hand but did not smile. "Show me the damage." For the next 6 hours, Gina toured the station with Vex and his team. What she saw made her angry. Systems that Sunho had maintained perfectly were falling apart. Temporary fixes had been stacked on top of other temporary fixes. Warning signs had been ignored. Maintenance schedules had been missed. "Why did you not follow the maintenance protocols?" Gina asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Vex looked embarrassed. "We tried, but there were so many systems and we did not have enough trained personnel. We prioritized the most critical items." "Everything is critical," Gina said. "That is what Engineer An tried to teach you. The junction is a connected system. When one part fails, it affects everything else." She pulled up her data pad and began making notes. The repairs would take months, maybe longer, and it would cost the station a significant amount of credits. Humanity was not working for free anymore. "I will send you a contract," Gina said to Vex. "It will outline the repairs needed, the timeline, and the cost." Vex nodded quickly. "Whatever the cost, we will pay it. We just need the junction working again." Gina looked at him. "The cost will be high. Not just in credits, but in pride. You will have to admit that you cannot do this without us." Vex met her eyes. "We already know that, Engineer Song. This past year has been a painful lesson." Gina nodded. "Good. Then we can begin." On the medical station at Talos Prime, Dr. Kwan arrived to find Dr. Gorth waiting desperately. The tall, feathered doctor looked like he had not slept in days. "Dr. Kwan, thank you for coming," Gorath said, his voice shaking with relief. "The situation here is dire." Dr. Kwan was in her 50s, a veteran of decades of medical work across the galaxy. She had trained under Dr. Yuna Han and had learned not just medicine, but the art of managing complex systems. When Earth's government had asked for volunteers to return to the galaxy, Kwan had been one of the first to raise her hand, but she had conditions. Everyone going out had conditions now. "Dr. Gorath," Kwan said firmly, "before we begin, you need to understand something. I am not here as an employee of this station. I am here as an independent contractor. I will fix your systems, train your staff, and get this facility running properly. But I will do it on my terms, and you will pay the rates we have negotiated." Gorath nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. The Council has authorized whatever funding you need, and you will follow my instructions exactly. No shortcuts. No ignoring protocols because they seem unnecessary. If you want human expertise, you get human standards." "Yes, absolutely." Kwan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Show me what you have been doing." As Gorath walked her through the hospital, Kwan saw the same pattern she had seen on Earth's reports. Well-meaning aliens trying to maintain systems they did not fully understand. They had the knowledge but not the intuition. They had the manuals but not the experience. "Where is Dr. Han's research on the Lumina?" Kwan asked. Gorath pulled up the data, relief showing on his face. "Here. I have been trying to continue her work, but I am struggling to understand her logic." Kwan looked at the data and smiled slightly. She understood Yuna's logic because she thought the same way. The leaps of intuition that seemed random to Gorath made perfect sense to Kwan. That was what humans brought to the galaxy. Not just knowledge, but a way of thinking that saw connections others missed. "I will need 3 months, Kwan said. 3 months to repair your systems, train your staff properly, and maybe make some progress on the Lumina research." 3 months, Gorath repeated. "We can manage 3 months, and after 3 months I leave. If you want me to return, you negotiate a new contract." Gorath hesitated. "You would leave even if the work is not finished." Kwan looked at him steadily. "Dr. Gorath, the work will never be finished. Medicine is an ongoing process. But what I can give you is the tools and training to continue without me. Whether you choose to use those tools properly is up to you." She did not say what she was thinking. That if they failed again, if they fell back into bad habits, they would have to pay even more for human help the next time. The galaxy was learning an expensive lesson about the value of expertise. On Harmony Point, Officer Dabin Cho stepped off his transport and looked around at the station that had once been peaceful. Now it looked tired and tense. Scorch marks from recent fires marred the walls. Residents hurried past each other without making eye contact. The atmosphere felt fragile, like glass about to break. Officer Threx met him at the docking bay. The young Karathi looked relieved and ashamed at the same time. "Officer Cho," Threx said, "I am glad you are here. The situation has gotten worse since we requested help." Dabin nodded. He had trained under Taijin Ryu and had learned the subtle art of peacekeeping in multi-species environments. He knew that keeping peace was not about force. It was about understanding, about reading the unspoken signals, about knowing when to intervene and when to step back. "Show me the current tensions," Dabin said. As Threx explained the situation, Dabin listened carefully. The problems were predictable. Without experienced mediators, small misunderstandings had grown into conflicts. Conflicts had grown into violence. Violence had created fear and separation. The station was coming apart. "It will take time to repair this," Dabin said. "Trust once broken is hard to rebuild." "How long?" Threx asked. "Months, maybe longer." Dabin looked at the young officer. "And it will require you and your team to learn. Really learn, not just read about it in manuals. You will have to develop instincts for this work." Threx nodded slowly. "Will you teach us?" "I will. But understand that this is a service. Humanity is providing expertise that the station needs. You will compensate us fairly, and you will respect the knowledge we share." Of course, Dabin wondered if Threx truly understood what had changed. Humans were not coming back as the helpful neighbors who did everything for free. They were coming back as professionals who knew their worth. The galaxy had to learn to value them properly. In the council chamber, Councillor Then watched reports of human teams spreading across the galaxy. Engineers at critical stations, doctors at failing hospitals, mediators at conflict zones. Everywhere humans went, problems began to improve, but it was not like before. Humans negotiated contracts, they set terms, they charged significant fees for their services, and they maintained their independence, refusing to rejoin the galactic community as full members. Some counselors grumbled about the cost. Some complained that humans were taking advantage of the situation, then listened to their complaints with growing frustration. "What did you expect?" he finally said during one heated debate. "We threw them out. We told them they were not wanted. And now we are surprised that they will not simply return to serve us?" The chamber fell quiet. "We are paying the price for our arrogance," then continued. "We assumed that we could dismiss them and then call them back whenever we needed them. We treated them as servants rather than partners." He looked at each counselor. "This is the price of that mistake." Elder Mirren, who had been invited to observe the session, nodded approvingly. "The price is fair," he said. "Humanity could have refused to help at all. They could have watched us struggle and die, but they are helping anyway because that is their nature." He paused. "But they are no longer doing it for free. They are teaching us that compassion has value, that expertise has value, that help freely given can also be freely withdrawn." On Earth, Ambassador Minji Choi sat in her office, reading reports from the human teams working across the galaxy. The news was mostly positive. Systems were being repaired, lives were being saved, knowledge was being shared,